We've been discussing the top competencies of digital transformation leaders, or people I call digital trailblazers, at my weekly coffee hour, the coffee hour with digital trailblazers on LinkedIn every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This is our third video of recording experts, CIOs, investors, and today I'm interviewing Tyler Johnson. He's an entrepreneur and an architect, and I wanted his view on the top leadership attributes of digital trailblazers. Welcome to the Driving Digital Stand-Up. My name is Isaac Sacolick. I lead a transformation leadership company called Start CIO, and I look forward to sharing with you the top 5 attributes that Tyler Johnson shared with me around digital transformation leaders. Hi, Tyler. It's really great to have you back on the Driving Digital Stand-Up. You were on this on my video channel. I think it was about a year ago. We talked about architecture and microservices. You're a regular attendee and speaker at my coffee hour. It's really great to be talking to you about the right people to lead digital transformation initiatives. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you're working on these days.
Well, yeah. So I've been in IT forever. Much like Isaac has been. And I just got really a passion for innovation and change. And after I left my corporate job a few years ago, I started a new company where we develop data fabric technology. I actually hold a patent for the data fabric that's priority back in 2015. So 8 years ahead of its day, I guess, as it were. But yeah, Isaac, I'm so thankful that you reached out to me, and I'm really passionate about transformation, and really looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Tyler. And you're not doing yourself justice in terms of just the breadth of architecture knowledge that you have. I know I could speak to you about data. We could talk about analytics. We could talk about security, cloud architectures, microservices like we did on that first video. Just a breadth of knowledge that you're applying at your company, PrivOps. I've been a big fan of what you guys are doing. And I want to thank you for being such a strong supporter of not just the coffee hour, but all my work as a digital trailblazer leader. So as you know, we did a session a few weeks ago. We talked about the top attributes of the right people to lead digital transformation initiatives, or of digital trailblazers, as I call them. We ended up capturing roughly 50 attributes. I haven't published all of them yet, but I've been speaking to leaders like yourself about which of the 5 resonate with you the most. I put them in 5 different categories. Our first category is leadership. Clearly very important when you're trying to drive change in your organization and lead an organization to a new business model and way of working. And your first attribute that you listed there, your important one, is vision painter. So talk to me about what a vision painter means to you.
Well, so for me, and I think, being Gen X, a lot of times we get stuck in the execution mindset and let's just get things done, right? But one of the things we can learn from our kids, what I've learned from my kids is, Gen Z, they want to go out and make a difference in the world. They're very outcome oriented in terms of having impact, whether it's social impact or other types of impact. And I recall reading Jim Collins' Good to Great back in business school back in 2005 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he talked about the big, hairy, audacious goal, the BHAG. And it's about having this big, impactful vision for what the team is trying to accomplish, right? So maybe if you're in a CPG or a consumer package group like that produces clothing or other consumer items, it may be your whole e-commerce strategy, right? So going from brick and mortar channel to sales to e-commerce, but really being able to incorporate some storytelling aspects of that combined with this big, hairy, audacious goal where we want to transform the way that we are doing things in some really impactful way.
Tyler, I love how you turn Vision Painter into a bottoms-up story about aligning the team of people who are really hungry to roll up their sleeves and get work done. Usually when we talk about Vision Painter, we think about it top down, how we aligning the board in our C-suite. And so much of what we talk about in terms of leading digital transformation is, how do we get team alignment? How do we get on the same page of what problems we're focusing on now versus later? What's essential for our customers? What's essential for compliance? So I love that starting point from a leadership perspective. When we talked about personal competencies, this is about who you are as a digital trailblazer, what aspects of your skills around your competencies that you're really focused on so that you continue to grow. And you went back to basics here. You said, I'm going to be focusing on being a lifelong learner. What does lifelong learner mean to you?
Well, I'll give you an example of that, Isaac. So we talked about the vision painter and the BHAG and the bottoms up. Well, I like to read books. I've read your books. I've read lots of books from a lot of really smart people. And I think being a lifelong learner is about being able to stand on the shoulders of giants. So, for example, when I think about the BHAG, and the vision painter question, I think about Clayton Christensen and disruptive innovation. Where disruptive innovation is the business model that you apply to applying technology and process, right? And that's a bottoms up sort of thing. Like, for example, many years ago, NetApp was an example and an innovator solution in Clayton Christensen. And he talked about NetApp, which I worked for several years, great company. And the way that they were successful was by creating a great product that the engineers loved, and that engineers would bring that storage into the IT department, as opposed to the big competition, which was IBM and EMC at the time. And they were in there talking with the CIO and the CEO and selling top down. And so being able to draw from these seemingly different attributes of being successful is really critical to being successful in a transformation perspective. And then also being able to draw from seemingly unrelated fields. Like, for example, when I first came up with the data fabric concept, I was actually inspired by a PBS Nova episode. And I don't know if you guys watch Nova, but it's one of my favorite shows of all time. And they had an episode on Mandelbrot and fractals. And I started thinking about how the way we build technology needs to be more fractal. So we need to have the same repeating patterns at different levels of the stack and self-similarity. And how would I build an architecture that would look like fractal mathematics, which, by the way, is the whole way that computer graphics was invented, where we went from just painting bitmaps to actually having formulas that would generate landscapes. And that's an example of, that's curiosity and lifelong learning that leads you to be able to draw from all of these different sources to be able to build that vision and build that transformative idea and support that.
Tyler, I love where you went with this because, first on, standing on the shoulder of giants, what I tell digital trailblazers is most of us are not true inventors. We're innovators. We're problem solvers. And chances are you can draw inspiration from lots of different places, lots of different leaders, lots of different technologies. Before you start rolling up your sleeves and implementing that vision, see what else is out there, particularly now when you can use a Copilot, you can use a Gen AI, and it's going to guide you into some places to go look at. So I love that from a lifelong learning perspective. And then Mandelbrot said, this is a true story. One of the first assignments I had in my computer classes back in 8th grade was to go program the Mandelbrot set on an Apple IIe. I'm dating myself, but the computer teacher recognized that I had some acumen and technical skills there and said, here's the formula for a Mandelbrot set. Can you go and plot this thing? And I had a brilliant time with that. I mean, and sure, you could go get libraries and download some of this stuff at the time, but it was so much fun just learning the nuances, translating the math into an actual implementation. So great stories there. I want to jump into the next competency area. I just call it transformation. It's about recognizing that you're taking your business forward in a big leap, in small chunks, that we're actually going to drive change, not just in our implementation, but in how we're working with our employees and with customers. We have a long list of transformation skill sets. You picked one of my favorites, but it's also one of the ones that it's just hard to nail what this means. So agile mindset. I know what a picture looks like. Talk about painting. I can tell you what a non-agile mindset looks like. I can tell you what non-agile looks. Very waterfall, very rigid, very structured. What does an agile mindset mean to you?
So I'm going to pull in somebody else. Since I picked lifelong learner, I'm going to keep going with this theme, and we're going to switch from Clayton Christensen and John Carpenter that basically invented CGI at Pixar to Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos, I always when he was writing them, I would always read his letter to shareholders every year. It was like required reading for me. And he likes to talk about this idea of type 1 and type 2 decisions. And type 1, think of it as like a one-way door. So the cost of making the wrong decision is like career ending or company ending or catastrophic in some form or fashion. Whereas type 2 decisions are decisions where you have minimized the cost of making the wrong decision, right? And I think about that as really kind of a lot of people don't talk about that when they talk about Agile. They get into the whole, Kanban, whatever.
It's a real architect's mindset. I say the same thing. It's like, okay, how do I defend against a bad decision in my architecture? Well, there's ways to do that in technology, right?
Yeah, and that is costly. I remember, so I was brand new, wet behind the ears, just a couple years into my career, and I joined Hewlett Packard to work on the Superdome server chipset team as a design engineer for the chipsets. And I remember that we were doing some testing, and I noticed that while we were doing it a little bit more than once, and so I wrote a script in Perl, if you remember Perl. I automated some of the testing, and I remember my mentor at the time, just a brilliant engineer still at Hewlett Packard, Ryan Ackerman, came into my office and he said, well, why did you do that? And I said, because why wouldn't you do that? You write a script once. It took me 3 times as long as it took to do the testing manually, but we do this twice a week. So by the time we get into the 3rd week, we're actually have a positive ROI on that, right? And that's where, it's so hard to get people's heads around that. So another example is Henry Ford and the Model T, right? So Henry Ford's innovation was the assembly line. And that really was the genesis of lean manufacturing, which I think lean is really the core of what becomes lean agile, which is what you need for transformation. And a lot of people don't realize that the assembly line was not invented by Henry Ford. Henry Ford actually adopted the assembly line technique from late 19th century butchers in Chicago. So the whole Chicago butcher market, these meat packers, they were taking cows and pigs and creating the cuts of meat and putting them in the rail cars and sending them all over the country. And they had figured out this way to optimize the process. And Henry Ford said, that's a good idea. If we use that over here, so this goes back to the whole lifelong learning thing, right? We could do something really powerful with the car industry. And so what Henry Ford did was he said, I'm going to take assembly line from meatpacking and apply it to automotive, and I'm going to produce a vehicle that will target a new market segment, which is the middle class, because in 1901, only rich people could afford automobiles.
Talk about innovation instead of just inventing. I mean, that's a great example of that.
Yeah.
And I actually love your Bezos story. There's a blog post I wrote a bunch of years ago, and it talks about a question Bezos answered to, I think it was probably, on the news or something, but he says, we're making our numbers today because we made the right decisions 2 or 3 years ago, right? And I use that as an example of how to answer the question about what's the short-term ROI against the innovation or the transformation that you're trying to do. And the answer is, I might not know it yet. Right? I need to experiment and iterate my way there. And at some points, at the right points, come up with some decision factors saying, am I heading down the right path? Where do I need to accelerate? Where do I need to slow down? Do I need to pivot somewhere? Do I need to just stop? Which in data science, that's an important one to say, hey, I'm heading down a dead end. Can I go somewhere else? So I love that example of using Bezos to talk about agile mindset. Let's talk about people skills for a second, right? We brought all this together. You picked one that we actually cover quite a bit in the coffee hours in a lot of different ways. I think it became in the forefront during and after the pandemic. I'm hoping it stays at the forefront for the next decade. You picked empathy. So, empathy means a lot of things to different people. Why did you pick empathy as an important people skill?
Because we all, I'll say, we have all worked with leaders that display a lack of empathy. And ultimately, those leaders are operators that run organizations into the ground eventually. And a lot of times what will happen is they'll run the organization into the ground and then jet off to the next job at a salary increase and leave wreckage in their wake. And for me, that is just not the way to be successful in leading transformation. You're not transforming. You're about yourself, not about the people around you.
And I just got that's just brilliantly said, because I get asked by board members and CEOs, and they say, Isaac, this is our third round of transformation, right? And when you start unwinding, why is it their third round? Why are they starting all over again for the third time? A lot of it can be attributed to not taking charge of the culture, or not having a real vision, or not having or having too many priorities and trying to push 50 projects through a team of 30 people. But you're hitting on a fourth one that's really important, right? When you don't think about how do you engage the team and the organization, and you're looking at it as a true top down, you're never going to get the long-term support that transformation requires.
You won't, and that kind of leads into culture. You can't change culture without empathy, or you can't work within culture without empathy.
Yeah, I think it's just so important that we talk about that from different vantage points. So, and I love this vantage point of looking at why transformations fail, because the leaders showed up and said they're going to be agile and inclusive, and when the pressure hit them, they went back to top down, command and control leadership style. So I think that's a really good call out. We talk about
and courage. You have to be courageous. I was thinking about our joint friend Walt Carter, who wrote a change leadership book that he released last year. I really recommend it.
I do too. It's a great book.
It's a great book. And he talks about Misfit Toys. So you remember the old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer like claymation thing from like the 60s, and they went into the island of Misfit Toys, and there are all these really weird,
I remember that,
funky outcast types. But what they had in common is they had empathy, and they had the ability to collaborate because of that empathy. Yeah. And what you're looking for is people that have the big picture. We'd like to talk about design thinking, but empathy plays a huge role in being able to say, well, what's
the core tenet?
What's the best for all of us? How do we rise the tide for all boats, as opposed to thinking about how I'm going to get my next job? You have to have people with that mindset if you're going to transform the organization.
I get it. Let's talk quickly about the last competency area. I call it digital, which really is about, in general, how you're going to bring solutions, from MVP to, long-lasting, evolving solutions, robust solutions, that whole chain of being able to deliver. And you chose problem solver and simplifier. Now, problem solver, I get, as you have an architecture's background. Talk to me about simplifier, right? Your story about Mandelbrot sets is classic. That's an example of simplification, right? So why is that a core competency for a digital trailblazer?
Okay, I was going to go in a different direction with this, since you brought up Mandelbrot.
Okay,
it's actually really fascinating, because you think about Mandelbrot and using fractal mathematics to create computer graphics, for example. It's actually something that is a little bit complex on the front end. So going from like painting via bitmaps to using equations to generate landscapes, that involves a little bit of complex mathematics on the front end, right? But what it does is it explodes exponentially your outcomes. The output of your system explodes along an exponential curve when you think about like things like that. So that is really just so powerful, that when you think about digital transformation, you really have to think about the process of transformation and how you optimize that first derivative. Sorry, I'm a math guy. But the rate of change of your transformation. And we were having a conversation like a week or two or a month ago where you were talking about that it was important with change management for folks in your IT organization to be approving changes in process, not changes in the result. So you get kind of one level up, and that exponential growth is what you really need to do, because we're in a world of exponential growth of data, for example.
So simplifier is almost equivalent to what I call force multipliers,
yes,
right? You're trying to find, we've talked about that a few times. I know Walt and I have talked about that a few times. Yeah. That's really about recognizing that if you keep hitting the nail with a hammer, it's going to take you a very long time to build a village. And, so we start thinking about how do we simplify, how do we automate, how do we scale what we're doing. Tyler, it's been a fantastic conversation with you. I'm just going to go over who is a digital trailblazer according to Tyler Johnson. That digital trailblazer is a vision painter, a lifelong learner, has an agile mindset, shows empathy with everybody they're working with, and is a problem solver and simplifier. Love that combination when you put it all together. I love your storyline with bringing in Christensen and Bezos and looking at the Mandelbrot set. Never thought I'd be talking about that today. Tyler, where can people find you and reach out to you about your expertise and about your platform?
Well, yeah. So as I mentioned, I left the corporate world back in 2015 to pursue a startup. And before that, I have a pretty unique career progression where I started in automotive manufacturing, high volume production, where I learned lean manufacturing. And then I ended up being a chipset engineer for Superdome supercomputers, where I learned architecture very deeply. And then I transitioned over into sales and business development, working with large system integrators. And then finally, as a product manager, leader.
I'm running out of hats here.
Yeah, right. All of these combinations of things led me to the data fabric, and this is what I got the patents for 8 years ago, right? So long ago, and Gartner's just now talking about it in the last couple of years, right? So if you want to learn more about our unique approach to data integration and kind of moving from DevOps for software development to DevOps for data, if you will, which is really kind of our unique differentiator, reach out to us or browse us at PrivOps, and that's the name of the company, which is short for privacy operations. So we build automation for things like data governance and compliance, in addition to ETL and data pipelining. And, I've written a number of blog posts that tie in directly to some of this content. So yeah, go to privops.com and check us out. And, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn or X, Twitter, or whatever that thing is now. But yeah, I'm not hard to find.
Okay, Tyler, we'll make sure those links up for PrivOps and to your LinkedIn and Twitter are there for everybody to see. And we'll put please look in the comments. We'll put all the links to some of your recent blog posts in the comments. Thanks, everybody, for joining this week's this episode of the Driving Digital Stand-Up and our discussion with Tyler Johnson, CTO of PrivOps, on his top attributes of the right people to lead digital transformation efforts and initiatives and what I call digital trailblazers. Thanks again, Tyler, for being on here with me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, as always, Isaac.